Let's see. And we're now recording. So it's 3:30 and 10:30 for our guest speaker. So we're not going to hold her up any longer. I'd like to introduce a friend of mine. She'll give you a little bit of information about her background and where she is right now and why it's 10:30 there. But this is Kim Kirkendall, who's an alumna of the University of Akron and some other places. And she's been my go-to person for some of the international business classes, and she's taught that elsewhere. I don't need to look at the transcript. And uh, she'll tell you, as I said, she'll tell you a little bit about herself and give you some information. I don't know if you prefer questions at the end or jump in with questions. I think rather than jump in, raise your hand at worst, but maybe save questions for the end. I did suggest that particularly the live students might want to be more participative. So with no further ado, Kim, you're up. And students, if you'd throw your cameras on at least for a little bit, I'd like to have at least, or sort of off and on, so that Kim knows that there's a real live audience.
Yeah, I probably can't see them once I have my, say hi to everybody quickly. Let's see all your.
All right. Well, then
once I have my screen on, I probably can see your screen.
Okay. All right. And
so, but we can definitely do. We'll turn them on for questions at the end. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So you guys can turn off your cameras for now, and then but there will be questions at the end. And remember, all of this is testable material, so take really good notes.
Oh, there you go. A little pressure. We like pressure. All right, you guys. So my name is here on the first screen, Kimberly Kirkendall. I encourage all of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you don't have a strong LinkedIn game, you better get one, because that is 90% of where companies and recruiters go to look for information about potential employees. And I want you to be as strategic about it as you are about your Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is you want to use. You need to build up a history of the things that you follow professionally. Remember, it's a professional site. So articles that you are in your field, you want to create a story about yourself. It's kind of an online resume, besides the fact that you can just put your resume up there. The posts that you share, the things that you like, the articles that you tag and mention all become part of people understanding what you're interested in doing professionally. So leverage that, right? Be smart about it, make use of it. I have over 6,000 plus counting followers on LinkedIn. I get about 13,000 views a week on the things that I post. So posting something and tagging me in it and saying we heard her speak, all of those 6,000 plus people are going to see your name. So if your LinkedIn has something about what you want to do professionally, then they're going to see that too. Not bad for you, right? So take advantage of this kind of opportunity. Strongly recommend it. Also, I have a podcast, which I think Dr. Hoskinett will talk to you about. And so you're welcome to go listen to that. It's on international trade topics. It's primarily for business professionals. We have very technical international trade discussions, from distributor agreements through export controls to the USMCA, US, Canada, Mexico trade agreement that was passed in the last few years that replaced NAFTA. So we have an expert from Mexico talking about that. So very good information for people in the field, in the business, but also a great way for you to listen to things that you're interested in, so that again, when you're doing interviews or meeting with professionals, you can be knowledgeable about these topics. Okay, so my background. I spent my 20s running factories in China. That's how I got started. I graduated in the US and I moved to China, went to university for a year. I speak Chinese. This is over 30 years ago. So this is very, very long time ago, very early in when China was not even at that point really developing yet. Lived there for 5 years. Like I said, I ran factories, all the supply chain, developed suppliers. Then I was in Hong Kong running all the Asian subcontractors in Thailand and Indonesia, Taiwan. So the majority of my life and career has been manufacturing and supply chain with Asia. International Resource Development is my own company. I've had this company for 20 years. My clients have been Disney, American Greetings, Vitamix, Gojo Purell, Swagelock, Invacare, Curtis Wright, a lot of different companies. In the last 5 or 6 years, I've had more clients in Australia, Argentina, Israel, all over the world for international trade and operations. We develop their supply chain management systems, troubleshoot problems with international suppliers, moving goods across borders, setting up distribution. I'm also an advisor for the New Zealand government. They do international business, which is a sweet gig. I don't mind that at all. I work with different companies every month. They basically spend an hour on the phone picking my brain, and then sometimes there's follow-up after that. A lot of it is HS codes, which are an important part of moving goods across borders, calculating duties and tariffs, understanding trade agreements, finding fulfillment centers, finding manufacturing OEM suppliers. This weekend, I'm speaking for the Inventors Council of the state of Florida for a bunch of inventors on how they can, if they have international suppliers, how can they manage them. So this has been my whole life. I'm also a CPA on moving goods. Sometimes the tax and regulatory and a lot of contracts is kind of where the CPA thing comes in. So what we're going to talk about today is the status of the global supply chain, which since COVID has been a hot mess. It's still a hot mess. You know, COVID really tested a lot of companies' structure on how they were purchasing. A lot of companies had gone global, both in supply and distribution, sales of their own products. And then with all the disruptions, with one country being closed down when another one was open and demanding goods, and then the second one closed just as the first one was opening. So it caused a lot of problems. We're going to talk a little bit about where we are now. So supply chain is still very volatile. I expect that to continue. We have an ongoing trade war between the US and China. There's a lot of disruption in India, Mexico, Vietnam, Thailand, Russia, obviously affecting Eastern Europe. So there's still a lot of political and economic challenges happening in many of these countries. I don't know if hopefully you read the international news. India and Canada just got into a spat because Canada has good intelligence that India, the Indian government or agencies in some way participated in having a dissident in Canada from India killed. And India denies this. India under Modi has become less democratic and what they call a liberal democracy or a non-liberal democracy. They raided the offices of the BBC a couple months ago because BBC had issued a documentary that was negative about Modi in his early career. So there's not necessarily freedom of press. There's minorities in India that feel they're being persecuted. So there's a lot of issues in India. Mexico, it has an election coming up next year, so that'll be interesting how that plays into what's going on there. The drug trade and drug problems in terms of the random murders and violence is ongoing in certain areas. The politics has been somewhat stable, but interestingly, the president of Mexico has moved some very significant agencies underneath the military. So they used to be independent or report under like the Department of Finance, and now they report to the Army or the Navy. This includes customs, and some of the aerospace and airports now report up under the Army. So I don't know what's interesting to see what's going to be going on with that. Vietnam is also a communist country. As much as we read about Vietnam having opportunities for business and development and manufacturing, there's still not freedom of speech. It's a communist country. It's ruled by one group of people. They have issues also with some minorities and immigrants on their borders. Thailand has been a military dictatorship for at least 10 years. It continues to become more controlled, and they recently had an election and are not allowing the elected party to run the country. They've found some reasons why they can justify that, but that party was not supportive of the military or the king, who's been king for over 5 or 6 years now since his father died, and he is also a very iron grip type of a king, which his father was not as much. So this newly elected party and individual do not support the king or the military, and so they have not been allowed to take their position. And so that's kind of an ongoing situation in Thailand. So in a lot of these manufacturing countries, there's been a lot of political disruption, economic disruption. Also in countries that are big consumers for the United States, which tends to be Europe, we're actually a very large agricultural exporter. Media content, electronics to some extent, medical devices, and then agriculture is big from the United States. And so some of our trading partners are also struggling with currency control issues or political issues. So definitely it's affecting companies here in the United States, both from a supply and a sales distribution standpoint. Costs are volatile. Inflation is happening here. Interest rates are high. You know, the disruption of the war in Ukraine and Russia and what's happening in those regions. Buyer-seller countries are mismatched, demand and supply. And so it's just been challenging for anyone that's in the supply chain business. Keeps me busy as a consultant. So it also has changed companies' goals and strategies. Up until COVID, it had been relatively calm for 10 to 20 years. And so companies had said, okay, we're going to use the principles of lean, and we are going to have one key supplier in one region for the whole world. We're going to use just in time. We're going to only keep enough inventory for a couple of days for our factory for raw materials. And all of these things were great when the system worked well and it was stable. And as soon as the system started to be under stress and it was not stable, then those ideals were not useful, because if you've only got a couple days of inventory and the other country where your raw materials are coming from is shut down for 2 months, you're in trouble, right? You're not going to be able to get those raw materials. Only having one supplier, even though you got a great price and it was much easier to manage, when something's gone wrong in that supplier's country, it's now a problem for you and you don't have a backup plan, right? So it's become a very different environment where companies are holding more inventory than they used to. They have multiple suppliers instead of single suppliers. It's very important to be agile, to be flexible, to have a plan B and probably a plan C. So that's all what's happening in kind of the last 4 years in supply chain. And I didn't talk a lot about China, but we will here in this slide. So, you know, China and the US are in conflict, in large part because they have very different perspectives on the issues that bring them together. So the US perspective here is on the left side and the Chinese perspective is on the right side. So the US perspective on the trade war is that Chinese government supports companies and the infrastructure and systems in China, which creates an unfair competitive advantage for those companies. China's perspective is that's our government structure. It's been our government structure. We're not changing it just because you don't like it, right? And you do it too. So, and we do, not to the extent that they do, and definitely not in the same way that they do. But we definitely support, that's why we have trade agreements. We definitely support major industries here. We support our farmers because that's a strategic necessity for our country to be able to feed ourselves. And we're very fortunate that we have great agricultural resources in the United States. And we have a lot of good raw materials and minerals and oil and gas. You know, we're very resource rich, which is fantastic for us. And we do protect some of those organizations and industries because it's in our best national interest, right? Not to the extent China does and not in the way they do, but we do. US perspective on technology and the internet, China blocks US market entry and the government has too much involvement. And China's perspective is we needed to let our domestic companies have a chance to grow. We didn't want to be completely dependent on imports for automotive and electronics and technology. We need our own companies to protect them until they could develop. And by the way, you do it too, right? This is their regular argument. They like to point out, you know, instances where we've done the same thing. Again, not to the volume, and maybe 20 years ago more than today, but still, that's kind of their refrain. Human rights, US perspective on China, the government is targeting minorities. It's obviously not a democracy. UFLPA was passed in June of 22. This is the Weaker Forced Labor Prevention Act, which targets any products that come from Xinjiang because the US and some of their partners agree that there is persecution of Muslim indigenous populations in that region. China's perspective is human rights, it's a terrorist problem and there has been incidents of terrorism linked to people in Xinjiang, bombings in Beijing and Shanghai and knife stabbings. And so there have been some of those issues. And again, their argument, and you've done it too, like look at your human rights history, and you're holding us accountable to where you are today, which is not where you were when you were developing 50 years ago, and we're still developing. And so that's kind of their argument. US perspective on Taiwan, it's an independent democracy and should be treated as such, although we don't officially call it its own country. We don't have an embassy there. So we don't fall on that sword yet. China's opinion is the island of Formosa after World War II was returned to China, and it was by the US and Western powers when we defeated Japan. And it was part of China until their civil war ended about 4 years later. And the KMT, which stands for Kuomintang, they lost that civil war and the communists won the civil war. And the Kuomintang had one of their strongholds was the island of Taiwan. So they decamped over there with a lot of antiques and gold and art and a variety of other things. And so hundreds of thousands of KMT leaders and wealthy landowners in China, because of their fear of communism, went to Taiwan and basically took it over. In the same way that the US kind of took over Hawaii or Puerto Rico or parts of southwestern US that were more Mexican or American Indian. And so they created their own country there. And for the first 40 plus years, it was a military dictatorship because The people who came over and took the land had more power and resources and did not compensate the people whose land they took. Since the late 80s, it has been more of a true democracy, and the Native Islanders are more involved and have freedom comparable to the people that came over and set up the country. But China still maintains that basically we won the Civil War and they should not have taken over this island just because they lost it, right? It's still part of our country. South China Sea, US perspective, it's international waters. We should be able to sail our ships and fly our planes around areas that are either recognized as part of China or China's saying that they should be part of China or are part of China. China's perspective is one of the major areas that there's been a lot of activity in the last couple of years is the strait between China and Taiwan. And they say Taiwan, that island was part of their country after World War II, and therefore it still is. And then also underneath all of that, China is a resource poor country, surprisingly to most people. They have a big population. They do not have a lot of arable land. They cannot feed themselves. They do not have enough land to grow food and feed themselves. They're a net import. They do not have enough energy resources. They have to import a lot of oil and gas. They have coal, but it's poor quality coal, and they're trying to get away from that because of environmental concerns. They don't have a lot of trees, so they really import a lot of very critical, fundamental raw materials and resources. And so one of the reasons that they are pushing their boundaries out past the mainland part of the country is that if you say that those islands are part of your land, part of your country, then the water between them is, and the oil and the gas underneath that ocean water is also yours. And that's something else that they're very interested in. So this is kind of a, their side, our side on how each side looks at these critical things that are going on right now. So where's China's economy? And I've been hearing for 20 years that China's economy is going to collapse, hasn't collapsed yet. People still saying it's going to collapse. What are the opportunities in the Chinese economy? It's continued to grow. It's slowed down the last 6 months, but their idea of slow is our idea of a good year. They used to click at 7 or 8, 9% growth a year, and we're typically like 3% because we're an established, industrialized economy. We're just not going to grow as quickly as a developing economy is going to. Naturally, we aren't. They're starting to slow down to that 4%, so it's still more growth than we're having. But for them, it's not as much as they used to have. Recently, they ended what's called extreme poverty. They are the only country in the world in history that was able to bring hundreds of millions of people out of extreme poverty just in a matter of decades. And so they're very proud of that. And that brings up a new class of lower middle class and middle class people into the workforce with more capabilities in education and more infrastructure to bring them into the workforce. They're developing more proprietary technology. They're actively growing a middle class standard of living. Their middle class is really booming and growing. China runs on a 5-year plan. So every 5 years, the central government says, this is our 5-year plan, right? And the 5-year plan that's in place right now is the fancy term of dual circulation. What dual circulation means is that they basically want to keep trade and business within their borders. So they don't just want to rely on exports or imports. They want to have more domestic business. They are interested in improving their ecological situation, and then common prosperity is another key buzzword for these standard of livings, right? That people's lives continue to improve. What are their challenges? They're a net importer of resources. It is common in China to have energy disruption. It's a very big concern of theirs. As I said, they're also a net importer of food. So from a government security standpoint, they've got some major security issues that we don't have, right? We have enough food, we have enough resources, energy resources. We are really strong in that sense, and that's, you know, very important for us. They have a major disparity in population age, just like we have this aging baby boomer population post-World War, so do they. And then they instituted the one-child policy to try to boost their economy, and it worked, but it worked too well, and they now can't reverse it, and they're not having enough kids. They have an underfunded pension system, which frankly we do too. A lot of companies, a lot of things is tied in real estate. So that's not fabulous. That would be in the US, we tend to split ours between the money that we have in our homes, in 401k accounts, and maybe some other investments. But people in China don't really invest or don't have a big portion of their savings in the stock market. They don't have other investments. A lot of it is in real estate, and that's a risk, right? If the real estate market, so their government's been propping it up, because if it were to decline, it would affect people tremendously. And then their banking system is still very restrictive, and it from a, you know, moving money across borders perspective, but also that the banks don't aren't very good about lending money to companies for what's called operating capital. Operating capital is the money I need to keep my business going. So the cash flow that I need to pay my suppliers until my customers can pay me. The banks in China don't lend money that way. And in the US, a lot of our lending is cash flow lending. So, and the banks in China lend money if you want to buy equipment or you want to build a building, but they don't want to lend you money just to keep your business going. And in the US, a lot of banks lend money to keep our businesses going so that we can buy raw materials and make the goods and wait for our customers to pay us. So these are their opportunities and challenges. So with all the disruption between the US and China, all the COVID changes, political, freeze that's going on right now, what are companies doing that were heavily invested in China, US companies? There's two strategies that have come out in the last 2 or 3 years. One is called China Plus One. China Plus One is, we can't quit China because a lot of our customers are there. There's a lot of US companies that are in China because their customers are in China, either Chinese customers or US or European customers. And if they weren't there, somebody else would supply that need. And it could potentially affect their business worldwide, not even just in China. A lot of times the suppliers and the capabilities for manufacturing particular parts are very strong in China. And those capabilities have not evolved in India or Vietnam or Mexico yet. So you can't really quit China. And so what people are doing are saying, all right, we're going to be in China, but we're going to develop a plus one country. Vietnam, Thailand, Mexico, India, and I see a lot of companies doing this. It's a good idea, as I talked about the disruptions with COVID in general. You don't want all your eggs in one basket, so it's a good idea to have an alternative, whether that's Southeast Asia or North America or India, wherever you want to be. The challenge is that even then, a lot of the components still come from China. The capabilities aren't necessarily involved, don't have the in the factory, or there's not engineering capabilities, or there's just not a supply chain in those parts. Local politics and labor problems, are also occur with these plus one countries. The other solution is what's called regional hubs. So that is, we're going to have a factory in Asia for Asia. We're going to have one in North America for North America. We're going to have one in Europe for Europe. And that way we're not moving goods all over the world. We have 2 or 3 different suppliers or factories in different regions. And that way, if there's a problem in one region, we got a backup plan in another, right? If we had to. So this is another strategy. It reduces lead times and freight costs for the region that you're supporting because you're closer to them. You can customize products for that region. You can use one region as a backup for another, but you still have with components and capabilities, and now in Eastern Europe with the war, and so it's not a risk-free strategy. Neither of them is a risk-free strategy. So what do we see happening in supply chain today? Opportunities. More countries are ready and stepping up to offer an alternative to China. By adjusting to the volatility, companies have really stress tested their systems and improved them. So they have improved their supplier management systems. They have a more robust systems in place, programs, decision-making. So that's great, right? It's increased capability in the company's management. Responsiveness and flexibility are more important than ever. So positions in supply chain, have been elevated, are more respected within companies than they were 10 years ago. Challenges, the volatility has not ended. Ongoing issues with politics and economic differences. Companies don't have enough supply chain professionals. I know a lot of people trying to hire somebody and it's hard to hire. So if you haven't picked a area of specialization, it's probably going to be a good one for another 5, 10 years, 20 years. Price and volatility can affect the company's profitability and potentially even whether they can stay in business. If they are being pushed all the time and they have to pay more for raw materials because they have to get it from a new supplier, and their customer is struggling in an environment of high inflation, then they've got price pressure on this side, and this side doesn't want to pay as much for their product. And so you can see companies going out of business in this kind of environment too. So it's, it can be very critical for companies. So what do we see in future trends in global conflict? I don't think anybody's tried to raise their hand or say anything yet. AI and technology are definitely coming in. I get calls all the time on LinkedIn. Hey, I run a blockchain software company and we want to pivot into international trade and supply chain. We'd love to talk to you about where you think there are some opportunities for us. There are definitely more growing solutions. Still a lot of very old technology in use, but I think that's going to change a lot in the next 5 to 10 years. Data analytics has become very important. A lot of companies have a data analyst on their supply chain team now, looking at shipping times and freight costs and inventory in ways that they weren't looking at it before. Sustainability has become more important to consumers and therefore to companies. How sustainable is your packaging? How sustainable is your supply chain? So that's become very important. Product customization with 3D printers and supply chains becoming more local. There's been more customization. I think that'll probably increase. Vertical integration. So we saw about 20 years ago, companies started to say, all right, we make this remote control, but we don't want to make the electronics inside, or we don't want to make the case. And so we're going to buy those from independent companies. And then what happened over time is that then when COVID hit and all this disruption hit, companies said, wow, if we're buying all of our pieces and parts and components from a lot of other companies, and those companies go out of business or they can't ship to us, or they have other customers that they prefer to us, we can't control it. So we want to go back to having our own, we own our suppliers. So we have our own factory to make, the plastic casing for this. We have our own factory to make the computer chips inside. So that has been happening. And these things come and go. Like they're here for 20 years and then it goes back to distributed again. And then 20 or 30 years later, it'll be vertical integration again. Blockchain and fintech are growing, you know, because it's really old-fashioned today how you move money across borders. I mean, amazingly old-fashioned. And there's a lot of opportunity in that space alone. Staffing and skill building. We definitely, the industry needs more people who are more capable with technology and, you know, AI and data analytics than they've had before. So these are what I see as the trends in global commerce. Now I'm going to stop sharing. And it is time for some Q&A, folks. So talk to me. Last time I was on site, so it was easier to do this like in the middle, but.
So please go ahead and throw your cameras on. If there's any language or acronyms or anything that Kim mentioned that you're not clear on, you can ask about that, or just ask maybe some more career advice. She talked about some career opportunities and things. So, you know, please ask away, or if we get too many people jumping on, then we'll have you raise your hands.
Let's do it. Come on, it's good topics. Money, moving money across borders, goods, manufacturing. Anybody? Otherwise, I have to tell you stories.
I did tell the live.
Oh, we have one.
Okay, good. I got a couple of questions. Go ahead. Natalia, go ahead.
Quick question. So you said something about in China's economy today, in the PowerPoint it said actively growing middle class SOL. What does the SOL mean?
Standard of living. So their standard of living is a measure, an economic measure of basically, are they at the level where they're barely able to feed themselves and provide housing, or are they at a level where they can have more choice in housing, you know, and more, and they have enough money that they have 2 or 3 months worth of money, you know, for their housing and their food, and they can buy more assets. So those are all things that factor into your standard of living.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? I think there was one other one. Oh, there's something in the chat.
I think that was me.
Up, the audio is breaking up. Okay. All right. Let me tell you, while we're on the topic of money and standard of living, one of the things when I talk to students, one of the things I always like to say at this point in life, you know, we hear a lot about, you know, depending on your parents and your families. I mean, some families say, I really want you to do what you love, and I want you to be happy and don't worry about money. And then other parents are like, you better make money. You need to get a good job. You need to make money, right? And then maybe somebody falls in the middle. But what I think is important about career planning, and it was always annoying to me when I was your age, people would say, what do you want to do? And I'm like, really seriously, like, how do I know? Like, what you think I want to grow up and be a chemical, you know, chemical equipment salesperson? Like nobody at 18, 19 years old says, I want to be a chemical equipment salesperson, right? That's not how we think. That's not how we think about what we want to do in life. So what I encourage you to think about is, you know, what's more important to your daily happiness at 30 and 40 and 50 years old is if you're in a work environment during the day that suits you, right? So understanding, am I the kind of person who likes a project that I can work on all day, uninterrupted, for days until it's finished? Is that what I want? Is that what I like? Am I better at that? Am I more comfortable with it? Or am I the kind of person who likes to have 10 things going on all at the same time? You know, and I thrive in that kind of environment. I like to have people coming to me and talking about things, and I got to handle this and I got to handle that, Do I like to work with a group of people where we're brainstorming ideas all the time and we're talking about what we want to do, and they're challenging my ideas? Would I rather just work with one or two people, or would I rather work alone? Realizing that about yourself is more important to you finding a career that you're going to be happy with and just being happy overall. And the good news is you could go into marketing and go into accounting, and you could find a job in any of those fields that fits what you like. You could go into accounting and you're the kind of person who wants to work on something all day. You could go into tax accounting and you work on a problem until you figured it out. But if you love being around people, you could go to a CPA firm and you could work with a bunch of clients. You could go in and manage their audits and help them understand how to run their business better, right? You could be on the people side of that field. So in almost any field, engineering, accounting, anything, you can find a type of job that fits how you like to work. So then the question is, what field do I choose? And that's where I kind of come back to, where's the money, right? What field has a good opportunity to find a job, steady, stable work, and the kind of like professional in life. And if it looks like it's data analytics is really hot. So I have 3 kids. My oldest one is a data scientist, my daughter. She's very creative. She's also very analytical, and she thrives in that field. She's not the best programmer by any means. There are other people on the team better than her, but she can see a problem and figure out how, like the customer's problem, which is what they do the data science for. She can understand the problem and figure out a way better than the guys who are good at programming. So you can find a space in these different fields. My youngest son studied engineering, but he's got that, con artist, salesman, shake hands baby's personality. That personality in an engineering degree is awesome, because a lot of the other engineers don't have his personality. So he really stands out in that field. And then he could end up with his engineering background in sales, and he understands the product better than someone who doesn't have an engineering background. So look at how you like to operate and think and work and do that kind of stuff, and find jobs that fit. But in terms of profession and career and industry, look at where the opportunities are and where the opportunities are going to be. Because one day I was driving somebody my daughter knew home from college. This is probably like 8 years ago. And her parents, probably worth $5 or $10 million, lived in a 6,000 or 7,000 square foot house. Money was not a problem. His parents also, owned a big company and had multimillionaires. And they're sitting in my back seat and they're talking about they don't want to pick their career for money, because a lot of times when you grow up with a lot of money, it just seems like it always shows up, right? You're less concerned about how am I going to get it. And because compared if you grew up in a family where money was more of an issue. So I finally said to these two, I said, money at the end of the day, for some people, money is a trophy. It's a way to say, I have this much money, or I have this big of a house, or I have many cars, right? It's a trophy of some kind. It's a competition. But at the end of the day, for me, money is choice. More money, more choice. Less money, less choice. So you get a job making $50,000 a year and you want to live in Chicago, you can only afford like the bottom 30% of the apartments. The top 70% you can't afford on $50,000. So that means you're going to have to choose from apartments that are in a less safe neighborhood, that don't have as many amenities. Maybe there's no air conditioning. Maybe you have to walk up 3 flights of stairs, right? Or you have to be farther away from work. If you're making $90,000 and you want to live in Chicago, then 50% or 60% of the apartments are available to you. And you could get an apartment with an elevator, and you could get an apartment in a nicer part of town. And if you're making $150,000 a year, then 80% of the apartments are available to you. And you could get an apartment with a rooftop pool and 2 bedrooms, you know, and a really nice brand new kitchen, right? So more money, more choice. If you have more money, then more choices are available to you. Choices about where to live, choices about, do you want to quit working for 6 months and travel the world? Do you want to start your own business eventually? So, you know, I don't believe in money for money's sake. I have loved my career, and one of the things I love about my career is that I help people. I help companies solve their problems. I help bring people together, you know, help them reduce some of their misconceptions about each other in different countries. So, you know, my small contribution to world peace. But also I believe that, you know, having money or making money puts me in a position to be able to make choices. And the more I have, the more choices I can make. So in terms of the things that you're looking at for like your future and what you want to do, that would be my advice to you at this time, along with, you know, having a strong LinkedIn game. Making sure that you're on there, making sure you're posting once a week, once every 2 weeks, even if you don't think anyone's looking. Reach out to people that come in and speak to class, reach out to people that are in your field, their field you want to be in, follow them, you know, read the articles. Work is a really big part of your life. It's, you know, it's the majority of 5 days of the week. It's the majority of your day. So it might as well be something you like doing, something you feel good about, that you feel like you're contributing to, you know, rather than something that you know, come home and they're just so thankful that you don't have to be there anymore. No, we don't think any of us want to be in that environment if we don't have to be. So questions about career, profession, questions about international politics or international travel. Anybody want to do any international travel? I'm in Athens, Greece right now. I'm digital nomading. I sold my house at a garage sale unexpectedly. It was not for sale. And I had already planned this trip. I was in China for business for a couple of weeks, came to Europe, was in Dubrovnik on the coast for like 2 weeks. And I'm sitting here in Athens, 80 degrees and sunny. Great restaurants and bars and walkable area. I get to go hang out at the Acropolis, and I'm an hour away from beaches. I can jump on a ferry and go to an island if I want to on the weekend, take my laptop and go work from there for a couple days. So yeah, I'm loving this right now. So, and I was in Ohio, like, you know, I was there for when I was raising my kids and stuff. I still traveled a lot, even when I was there, because that's, for me, that's one of the important things, is to be able to travel internationally. So, questions? Anybody?
If they don't ask one, I'll throw you a small curve. I'd mentioned that in introducing you to the classes, I talked about your China expertise, that you spend a lot of time there. For these students now, 2023, looking at the future, in addition to the fields, where would they go? You know, what's emerging? Is Africa going to emerge more than it is? Should they still be looking at Asia, South America? Where would you send people now, as if they wanted to be an expert
in one country? It's interesting.
Country or region.
I think I was very, it worked in my favor that China, when I chose Chinese, not in any way, everything was about Japan, but the Japanese culture, not fans of women, and still not fans of women in BizPan, and not really open to foreigners. And the Chinese culture was better about that. And I thought, it's got to develop eventually, right? So now I look like a genius, but So one of the things that helped me with China was that at the time they weren't able to travel freely, and not everybody spoke English. And so if you choose a region or a country where people in that country are not as internationalized, and they don't speak English as much, and they're not traveling as much, then you're more necessary, right? If you want to work in France and a lot of French people speak English, and a lot of French people have traveled all over England and, you know, been to the United States, and those French people can provide the cross-border services. You're not quite as valuable. Whereas if you pick a region where people in that country have not traveled to North America, and then you're more valuable, right? In terms of geopolitics, I would say Africa, you know, is stabilizing, and obviously Africa has a lot of individual countries, and they different parts of the continent have groups of countries that have more political issues, more or less resources, more or less infrastructure. We definitely see it growing. I think the stand is Pakistan and you know, between the Middle East and Asia, those regions are developing. Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand. You know, Thailand's pretty developed. Malaysia is pretty developed. Indonesia is still developing. Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Bangladesh are developing. Philippines is a conundrum in the Philippines. Very educated population, almost no manufacturing. They're very reliant on agriculture. So if you look at your big languages, French is really the most helpful in Africa or some parts of Asia, Canada. One of Ohio's biggest trading partners is actually Germany. And so German can be very helpful. Spanish, South America, you know, we see volatility where Venezuela is very stable and Colombia is a hot mess, and then Venezuela is a hot mess and Colombia is stable, and you know, Argentina has major currency issues right now, you know. But Spanish is obviously good for international business. South America is growing. We see some more stability than we did 30 or 40 years ago. I do think that over the next 10 to 20 years, overall, the world is going to be very volatile. I just think we're in for a period of volatility worldwide, in the US included. So that makes life interesting. But if you're a problem solver, if you get paid to solve problems, then the more problems there are, the more work you have, right? So when COVID hit and supply chain went crazy, I was super busy. So, you know, it being a problem isn't necessarily bad if you're in the business of solving problems. So anybody else? I encourage you guys, connect with me, send me, it's on my LinkedIn profile, it gives you the option to follow. But if you hit more, then you can actually send me a connection request. You don't have to have my email address. And you can message me there if you have any questions about what you're doing. In the past, one of your students had an Amazon business and he was importing some stuff. And so he asked me about that actually in LinkedIn. So that was fun. But definitely, you know, look, personally for me, I am not a passive person in my life. I like to decide where I'm going and what I'm doing. I like to think about what I want to do professionally. I reach out and talk to people. So next week here in Athens, I got here 3 days ago, and I went on LinkedIn and I found about 10 people in Athens that I didn't know who are in related fields to mine: international trade, international policy and economics, some China. And I reached out to 5 or 6 of them and I said, hey, I'm here for a month. I'd love to get a cup of coffee. And they all answered me. So next week and the week after, I'm having coffee with a few different people here, some in the government, some in academic, some in business. And I really look forward to that because I love talking to people. I love finding out about what they do and their opinion and perspective. So it doesn't have to turn into business for me to be interesting. I just love the conversation. I love to learn. So it's amazing how far you can get just by asking, just by sending a message and saying, hey, I'd love to get a coffee with you. And they're like, yeah, sure, I'd love to get a coffee with you too. So here we go. Next couple of weeks, I got all these meetings.
Did you know John Thanopoulos when you're at Akron?
I think maybe I met him. Is he here now?
I think he may be back in Greece. So for the students' perspective,
Oh, cool.
John was one of the ones who started the international business program at the University of Akron. So he's kind of sort of responsible for all of this stuff. So I'll dig around and see if I can find an email for him and shoot it to you.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah,
it'd be fun. All right, you guys.
Okay.
Anything else?
Last question. Last question for 10 bonus points. They're hard to bribe.
He's not above bribery.
Now we've got a question. Sensei,
Here we got one.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You say you're international, right? So like you travel all over the world. One question. So we went to Japan because I'm trying to like currently go over there. In the future, like have a job over there. Was it like kind of hard getting like a job over there, Sensei, in your field?
And you want to go to Japan?
Yeah, like in the future. Yes.
Okay. There's basically two ways to do it. One is you just go over and you maybe take like a 6-month educational course over there or something. And once you get there, you're really good about going to all the American Chamber of Commerce events and, you know, the 4th of July party at the US Embassy. And you get yourself out there and you network with a bunch of people and you tell them, hey, you know, I'd really like to look, I'm looking for a job here and I'd like to stay. That's option one. Option two is you target a company in the US or 10 companies that have operations in Japan, sales office or distribution or manufacturing or suppliers. And you go to those companies and say, I'd really love to work at this company because at some point I'd like to be posted, you know, in Japan. It's riskier to take the first option and just go over there and hope you find something. Takes a lot longer with the second option, and you may work for a company for 5 or 10 years and they never send you over there. They never send you anywhere, you know. So those are the two, you know, the two biggest ways you could do that. And then most countries, including Japan, you can't just go live there indefinitely if you're not enrolled in university or you don't have a job. There's a limit to how long you can be in the country, like 90 days, 120 days. And so you can't even really just go over and like pick up some side hustle and try to set up your own business and make money, because you'd have to leave the country, you know, at least what they call visa runs. You'd have to fly to Korea and come back in and start the 90 days all over again. So it's possible, but it's not easy to do. So that's the advice I would give you. But yeah, I actually know some Americans in Japan. One works for a construction management company. They do big infrastructure projects. And so they have a lot of clients with like multi-million, billion-dollar rebuild our water system. And they come in and work between the architects and the construction companies. And they're a US company, and they've got jobs in Singapore and Korea and Japan. So there's a lot of different fields, you know, that would have business in Japan. Good question for the extra bonus points.
Oh, thank you.
Anybody else? I can't tell
All right,
you.
you guys. I'm gonna go to bed.
It's late for you. So and you get the sunny weather. You've had the sunny weather. We're getting rain, and it's gonna be in the 50s by the weekend. So I said there's somebody in the chat.
I'm gonna answer her.
Okay.
Okay, guys,
Right.
take
All right.
care.
Thanks a lot. I'll end the recording and the transcribing.
Okay.
Enjoy your coffees. Bye-bye.
Bye.